This is the GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. We're aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 201. In this episode, we talk with Andrew Bunting, Vice President of Horticulture at the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, about garden watering tips. The plant profile is on Alstroemeria, and we share what's going on in the garden, as well as some upcoming local gardening events and this week's garden tasks in the What's New segment. We close out with a last word on garden yoga from Christy Page of GreenPrints. This episode, we're joined by returning guest Andrew Bunting. He is the Vice President of Horticulture at the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, otherwise known as PHS. Andrew, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great to have you on, and we're going to talk all about watering and caring for the moisture levels in our gardens. And before we get into that, I know we had you on for past episodes talking about all things magnolias and hydrangeas. And the last time we had you on was the Gold Medal Plants program for PHS. And that was in September of 2022 that episode came out. So just a quick update on anything new on the Gold Medal Plants program or anything else going on with you.
Sure. So since then, we've actually brought the Philadelphia Flower Show back indoors. So typically, the flower show is kind of the last weekend in February and the first week in March. And with COVID, we held it outdoors in 21 and 22. So now we've been back indoors in 23 and 24, and we're already working on the 2025 flower show. So that'll be, again, kind of that same time period next year. With regards to gold medal plants, we continue to make selections of those. We select about 6 a year, and we have an external panel of nursery people and communicators and botanic garden and arboretum people that help us with the selections. And we usually select a couple perennials, a couple shrubs, a couple trees, but we've also added a hardy edible category. So last year, or actually for this year, the winner was asparagus millennium, which is a top producing asparagus. And then we've just selected the 2025 winners. So we'll be doing some press on those shortly. And the last 2 years, except for the asparagus, and this was not by intention, all of the plants have been native. So that's popular subjects now are native plants, and the gold medal winners for 24 and 25, except for the asparagus, are all native plants.
Yeah, and I need to add millennium to my own vegetable garden because I've been growing, I think it's Martha Washington asparagus, and it just does kind of I would say. Are you growing millennium yourself?
I don't have it. I have or had a home vegetable garden, but over the years it's become shadier and shadier for my neighbor's trees that I'm in the process of transitioning it into more of a ornamental garden.
And what else is going up in your garden or going in, or new plantings or anything else you want to share?
I'd say the big thing that I'm working on, which ties in what we'll be talking about today, is at the very beginning of COVID, I was sitting in my home office looking out on what was kind of a dismal landscape. It had been kind of a cottage garden for a number of years, and just everything had gotten overgrown or things had died out. And I had been inspired by the work of Jeff Epping with gravel gardening in Madison, Wisconsin, and the gravel garden at Chanticleer, and the multiple gravel gardens at the Scott Arboretum. So I was inspired to install my own gravel garden in my front yard, which I did. I hired a landscaper to remove about 8 inches of soil, brought in 2 inches of gravel, tilled that in, and then put 6 more inches on top. So I'm now in the fourth growing season, and it's, it does take some effort to get things established, but now that they're established, it's really a garden that requires little kind of human interventions. I do have to clear off all at the end of the year and kind of keep organic matter, off the site. But other than that, there are no real weeds. So that's kind of the biggest gardening update that I've done.
And I had the pleasure of visiting your garden in person with the Garden Bloggers Fling not that long ago, and I saw that gravel garden in process, and it looked pretty far along to me. It looked like it was fairly mature.
Yeah, pretty mature. I'm still tweaking things, adding things. Like I realized I needed some more grass. I have from previous garden. I have 3 clumps of Millennia Sky Racer. So I just added some panicum spring. I'm trying to get the prairie drum established, spirobolus, etc. Leaf. But yeah, it looks good. Actually, Jeff Epping mentioned, in a book, Gravel Gardening. He and his photographer coming, I think not this weekend, but the following weekend, to do some photography. So I think it's in good enough shape for that.
That's quite a privilege to have that. So speaking of gravel gardening and maybe needing a little less water in the garden, are you supplemental watering your gravel garden?
Only like if we go, say, a month without any moisture, I think the plants actually would be fine, but I do maybe put out a hose with an oscillating sprinkler for an hour or so, just to kind of recharge the plants. But I think they would be okay. It's when it rains, the water goes right through the ground, the soil below, and most of the roots of the plants, they anchor in the soil below the gravel. So I think they're tough by nature. Like I selected things that are drought tolerant and kind of prairie type plants with deep root systems. So I think they would be okay. But yeah, I don't really, other than establishing things in the spring. And what I do is I take all the soil off the roots, so I'm essentially bare rooting them, and I plant them in April when it's not that hot out, and water them, for a couple weeks, because they're essentially growing kind of hydroponically through the gravel and then anchored in the soil below. So the only time I can plant is in April when it's just not that out.
And we'll discuss some of those great drought-tolerant plant choices maybe later on in the conversation, but let's start at the beginning of watering in the garden and how we figure out or measure or can tell when our gardens need watering. So do you do the old-fashioned insert your finger into the soil, or how do you gauge when your water needs gardening? I mean, when your garden needs watering.
Is maybe even more old fashioned than that, is just let the plant be the indicator. So if it's wilting, now there are some plants like some of the big leafed hydrangeas that, it seems to not matter if the soil's moist or not. If it's super hot outside and sunny, that they wilt regardless. But I would say most plants, they are a good indicator of needing moisture because they'll wilt a little bit. So I tend to use the plant as the indicator.
I'm glad you pointed out the hydrangea wilting looks, because I think that's more a matter of just being too hot than actually needing moisture in the soil. But other plants that droop like that, of course, if they're wilting, we want to give them some water. And I was just thinking about another plant that looks like, I think it's the contorted filbert, that always looks like it needs watering because it has this kind of drooping, hanging down foliage.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There are other plants that may look like they're wilting, but aren't really. Uh, I've never used like a soil water probe. I do. I might put my finger in the soil. I actually do that more for like a house plant because it's not going to really tell you indoors
Hmm.
whether. I mean, certain things will wilt, but other things really don't. Succulents and things like that, they don't wilt per se. So I tend to use that method more indoors than outdoors.
Hmm. And do you go by the rule that an inch of water a week, so that could be from rainwater or it could be your supplemental watering, and that would be for established plantings, I think.
Yeah. Well, what I find is once my plantings are established, I mean, an inch a week would be great if it rained an inch a week. But I have well established shrub and perennial borders that, we can go, multiple weeks without a lot of moisture, and they're still, you know, pretty uh, turgid. They don't seem to be suffering. If I see an area that especially a newly establishing garden, like I just planted an area where I've typically had tropicals over the years and decided to try to make it a little bit more sustainable and put in some pollinator plants. And that those plants are still establishing, so I'm more likely to give them, maybe put on the oscillating sprinkler for, an hour or so, just to help them further establish. But I would say most of my, tree and shrub plantings, to some extent perennials as well, they, unless things are super dire, I don't I don't water them.
And speaking of super dire, Andrew, not sure how bad it's been in the Philadelphia area for the last month, but for the month of June here in the DC area, we had virtually no measurable rain and temperatures approaching 100 for several days in a row. And I don't think we went below 95 for a couple weeks there. So it's been pretty dire out there.
We did have a rain somewhere in that period, which
Mm.
to kind of rehydrate things. Good shower. But yeah, it's been, I think we've all been experiencing these more severe periods where, it's hotter, it's sunny, and more extended than it normally is. I think we're, typically, or no, I want to call it normally, during the summer, we expect to have, these thunderstorm events every once in a while that
Mhm.
help to kind of recharge or rehydrate the garden. But those, the droughty periods seem to be becoming more of the norm.
Yeah, it's really tough out there in the garden to get things established or to even get your vegetable garden going, right when you're hit with high heat at the beginning of summer and several weeks of drought. I know I'm really feeling for especially Virginia farmers and cut flower growers and those people, because it is just harsh out there, Andrew. And hopefully some of the tips we give today in this conversation will help them. And so how do you get your rain forecasts or measurement afterwards of how much rain we actually got? Because, you can get a storm that I don't get, and it could be literally that we're across the street from each other. So where you go for your accurate forecasts and measurements?
Yeah, I guess I should be more scientific about it. I have in the years past had rain gauges. Right now, I have some containers around the garden that are just there for ornamental reasons. So I can. One of them's like an old cast iron bucket, so I can see how much it's rained from that bucket. But yeah, I think like a rain gauge, an old fashioned rain gauge, is good if you can find you know, a local official weather station. So I was on a kind of a panel, I guess, of experts who are convened to help the USDA with their new hardiness zone map. And so for that, they used 13,000 different weather stations across the United States, including Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico. So there are, a lot of times these weather stations are like when I worked at Chicago Botanic Garden, we had an official weather station, and I think they're at universities and they're around. So if you can find one of those and get the data, that'll be the most specific for kind of a micro area. If you go on the news and it says, we got 2 inches of rain, that's probably from a weather station at the Philadelphia airport, which in our case is pretty close to where I live, so that would probably be fairly accurate. But just a regular newscast, you'd have to know where the weather station is, because it can be super localized. Like I came probably a couple weeks ago, there were some storms that came through Philadelphia, and I was where I am today at Meadowbrook Farm, which is north of the city, and I drove. It's about an hour from here to my house, kind of south of the city, and it was a total deluge. So much so that you can hardly see the road. And I get back to where I live, Swarthmore, and it looks like it sprinkled. Like there wasn't even moisture under trees on the street. So I think is specific information you can get from a local weather station. That's going to be the best data. Or put your own water gauge in the backyard. Measures in inches and fractions of to really understand what you got exactly at your own property.
I agree. And I think with a rain gauge, you want to be sure to locate it somewhere kind of out in the open. So it's not getting a bounce back or under trees, as you said, where you might not be getting any rain. Or you could situate a few different rain gauges, one under the tree zone and one out in the open, and kind of compare those. I also like a service called Cocorahs. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but that's Cocorahs. And that connects you to your local, like hyper local, probably just a few blocks down the street from you, weather station, an official monitoring service. And if you could, plug in your zip code, you can usually find one near you and get that. And that's been much more helpful to me than the local weather reports, which, National Airport, Dulles, or BWI, that can be highly inaccurate for me.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about timing and watering. So we've always heard that you should only water in the early morning. Do you go by that, Andrew?
Yeah, no, I've heard that also. That's probably good information. I just because of my schedule and lifestyle, I guess I kind of water when I can. which sometimes is not the best time. It might be in the middle of the day, but that's just when I have the time to actually do the watering. So yeah, I think morning would be the best because it's not as hot. It's not as the sun isn't fully up in the sky, so uh, the water you put down is less likely to evaporate then than really any other time of the day. It's also kind of on the flip side suggested that you don't water at night because that could maybe exacerbate the spread of especially fungal diseases. Although I think a lot of like golf courses and so forth might do nighttime watering.
Mm-hmm.
Lawn irrigation system goes on at night. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've read some more recent studies that talk about night watering for containers, not for, in-ground plantings. And they actually said that that could be better, that the plant roots take it up better and it has the night coolness if it ever does drop temperature at night, Andrew, which some of these nights have not been dropping off for us. So that's allowing a little more uptake. But again, as you said, morning is ideal, but I think watering when you can is, the second best.
yeah, I tend to do my containers. I have quite a few tropical containers on my patio. I do, especially if I'm going somewhere for the day, like I will water those first thing in the morning.
Hmm. And I do like, sometimes the nighttime container watering makes you feel better because, again, you're out there in the cool of the evening and that's when you can get it done. You might have like been traveling all day and you're like, oh, this isn't good. I'd rather sleep in the next morning, or you have jet lag or whatever. So again, feel better about that. And I think the next point on our list is actually a bigger concern rather than timing is where you are watering on the plant. Meaning, I see these ads, Andrew, for hoses or other things, and people are literally just spraying the top of a shrub or a perennial border. Like it's just raining down on them rather than at the roots of the plant. So, what is your philosophy about that?
Yeah, I see people all the time. I saw a guy the other day, watering, so to speak, and he was just, he had a hose with some sort of sprayer at the end, and he was just spraying like the foliage of a hydrangea, almost anything, if you hit the foliage, it has to absorb through the roots. So, a lot of it gets dispersed and doesn't really get directed to the roots. I don't have the time to go around and water each plant individually and get the wand, down through the foliage to the base of the plant. So the way I typically water is, and I'm not saying this is the most efficient way, it just works for me, is I put out an oscillating sprinkler that goes kind of back and forth. And if you leave it on long enough, the water does penetrate, drips off the leaves and eventually hits the soil below. Now, if you have the ability to kind of spot water, around the base of the plant where the root zone would be, that would be ideal. Soaker hoses are something to consider. I've never been a big fan of soaker hoses because it tends to, like, where the water comes out of the soaker hose, it soaks that area. It doesn't always soak the soil right around the
Mm,
base of the plant
hmm.
root zone. So I don't like the aesthetics of soaker hoses on top of the soil. Then people that put in soaker hoses that are more kind of quasi, permanent, maybe under the mulch. Uh, they inevitably get eaten by chipmunks, or you forget about it, fade through them, or they just degrade over time. So I know, irrigation companies advocate for either in-ground, drip soaker hose systems, or above ground systems. I'm not a big fan of either. I'd rather do kind of more strategic type watering, watering the things that actually. I have things in my yard that, other than rain, uh, they don't get watered. They establish shrubs, trees. They they kind of have to fend for themselves after a period of time.
Mhm. Yeah, I think my observations of soaker hoses similar to yours, in that they get plugged up, um, like little pieces of mulch or whatever, or debris and soil get into them, and so you know, then you didn't realize it was plugged up at that part, and then the hydrangea or perennial or whatever that was sitting at the base of that um, starts to die and you didn't realize. So I think you have to check or uncover your soaker hoses and check those. Same thing with your drip irrigation systems. You have to go around and inspect um, each of the nodules to make sure it's still emitting. Otherwise, there's no use in having them. But I do notice in some gardens that the plants kind of adhere themselves, almost like paste themselves, as you might say, to the drip irrigation or soaker hose systems, and they don't expand at all. They're just like, oh no, this is where I'm going to live and sit, and almost the root system will wrap itself around that area.
Or they, because with the soaker hose, most of the moisture, tends to be at the top of the soil. That the roots tend to more exist in that top layer of mulch and maybe soil versus going deeper down.
Hmm. Yeah. And I'd like to see some more studies on that, Andrew. I don't know if you've seen any studies where you hear that you should water deeply, but not as often, rather than watering often but shallowly. So, because the roots will stay at a shallow surface if you keep doing it shallowly, correct?
I
But
haven't
mhm.
that all completely makes sense.
Yeah, I think it makes common sense. I just have never seen an actual scientific study that shows the root system's growth in both those situations. I'd love to see it maybe with various plants. Like, do they actually stay at the surface when you're watering shallowly, or do they grow just like roots normally do? It's just that the top ones get whatever moisture there is. So let's talk a little bit about some of our favorite things we use for watering tools. So I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you if you have a favorite hose system or type of hose.
Yeah, I use the brand Flexogen. Uh,
Hmm.
they're, I think you can buy them at some of the box stores. You can definitely get it on. Well, you can get anything on Amazon, of course.
Hmm.
Flexogen is, uh, I know it's those that's often used by, you know, commercial landscapers because they like it for its durability. And I think I like they're like a half inch or a 5/8, maybe it's a 5/8 inch hose, and they do, holds up well. I usually buy them in 50 foot lengths. I think you can get a longer, like maybe 75-foot length. Easy to coil. Uh, keep out of view. I think they both come in like kind of a turquoise color, but maybe there's a black one. It's
Hmm.
more invisible in the landscape. And then I just well, sometimes I buy a valve because that's handy to have at the end of the hose. And then I use so there's all sorts of kind of adapters you can put on. The typical one you see is the one that's kind of narrow. It's made out of brass.
Mm-hmm.
They're, just in real narrow stream or kind of a spray. I don't use that at all. I just use it's called a breaker,
Mm-hmm.
um, uh, made by Dramm, Dram. And what I like about that is it just really nicely it disperses a lot of water, but not in a harsh way like with some of those adapters. The water comes out in such a narrow, strong, shooting manner that can displace all the soil, especially in a pot. But the Dram breaker nicely broadcasts the water, a lot of volume out without the plants. Sometimes if maybe I have hanging baskets or something like that, you can get what's called a wand.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a hard piece of like a pipe, that you can screw into the hose, breaker on the end, and it just gives you a little bit more reach in the garden. It's really good for like maybe window boxes that are not easily accessible, or hanging baskets again, or maybe not so accessible. So as far as hoses go, that's kind of my setup. Is a hose, a shutoff valve, like a brass shutoff valve. You can get that at any hardware store, and then a Dram breaker. And even the Dram breakers you can get metal ones. But you can even get cheaper kind of plastic ones with uh, what makes the spray. That cover is metal. Uh,
Yeah.
the metal breakers last, really forever. Sometimes you have to replace the little rubber one, but other than that, they're pretty indestructible.
Mm-hmm. I find the same. I use Dram watering wand that you describe, especially for hanging baskets or anything over your head. Gives you like a good at least 2 feet to 3 feet,
Yeah,
farther reach. And then, I'm pretty rough on things, hoses, spigots, everything. And so, yeah, I have the same brass turn off valve at where the hose is coming out, so I can have a split system, one for the front yard, one for the backyard hose. I tend to drag my hoses around and I would say run over things. So in that case, I probably should install, those hose guards that you have around, but I find them to be a bigger trip hazard than the hose themselves and to do more damage. I've seen people use various type of hose guards, but what I generally use now too are the super light, flexible, those 50-foot hoses that you can smush down into the size of a coffee can. And those aren't as durable as the brand you had mentioned, but they are super light and allow me to kind of run over things without killing them and kind of drag them over, because I am like just running around like a crazy person if I'm having to pull out the hose. And sometimes I just get really frustrated and I'll take off the nozzle off into the hose, and I just use the old-fashioned thumb method, right? So you can direct the water just by placing your thumb over it and making the spray go where you want to.
yeah. Well, it's good to know about your hose. I thought those were just a gimmick, but it's
Mm.
work. So I might do that as well because I don't. One of my least favorite chores in the garden, roll it,
Mm-hmm.
hose up, and I actually tuck it into it gets discreetly put in one of my window wells,
Yep.
and that's one of my least favorite things to do. So if I could get a hose that just, like you said, condenses down into the size of a coffee can, that sounds ideal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've had one for I think 3 years now with very rough use. I did destroy a previous one, dragging it across the driveway, and that was my fault. Like it wasn't the hose's fault. I just dragged it across some grit and gravel and other sharp things when I shouldn't have been doing that. And that ripped like a little bit of the outer fabric encasing, but the inside part just kind of blew up like a balloon. So that was comical, but again, entirely user fault, not the host's fault. And I think, as you said, with Amazon and other places, you can go on and read a bunch of reviews and compare. And, when the subject of favorite hoses or equipment goes on a gardening list or discussion group, everybody has their favorites, right? There's all different ones out there that, tons of different ones made, but I would say Dramm, DRAMM, as you mentioned, is mostly the one used by horticultural professionals. So let's talk a little bit about watering cans. So we all have our favorite watering can shape and usage. Are you using watering cans for your containers or just for your indoor plants?
And I have some outdoors. I can't the brand. The type that I like are I like ones that are metal. Maybe just because I usually leave them out in the garden somewhere. They kind of aesthetically fit in the garden better than say a green plastic one. I like ones that don't. Maybe maybe they came with a nozzle at the end, but actually, the ones where you can take the nozzle part off and it's just a stream of water that spills out of the end are the ones that work best for me because those I always get dirt in them. The nozzles always get plugged up, so I I don't use watering cans much. Where I do use them are plants that are not easily accessible by the hose. I have an area at the end of my summer house that takes a lot to get a hose out there, so I just fill up the watering can and go over there and hand water those plants. And I have a couple window boxes, same thing. They're not super accessible, so I often water them with a watering can. But I would say my use of watering cans in the garden are pretty minimal. Like I think
Mm-hmm.
if you had say a small patio and maybe where the faucet is in the front yard and getting a hose back there is a hassle, maybe water filling up a watering can a few times to water on a handful of pots, that would probably work fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say in our vegetable garden plot in the community garden, we have to tote water from the cistern. So we're filling up at a faucet from a cistern, and we're using comically my kitty litter jugs rinsed out. So those are like the big jugs that you can put a lid on it if you want to mix in some organic liquid fertilizer and kind of shake it up in there. But it makes hauling water a lot easier. It's not the best thing for dumping the water, right? Because it's a big opening on the plants at their roots, but you could pour that into a smaller watering can or a finer one, especially when you have little seedlings. I find like just emerging seedlings, I might transfer it or use one with a fine opening just for those little seedlings, for a couple weeks on them. At home, I'm using a Dramm watering can that I like, and it has a nozzle that comes off. And you're right, Andrew, leaves and stuff get in there. I'll get pieces of mulch, but luckily that one's pretty easy to rinse out and take off. But sometimes in frustration, I'll just like pull it off, yank it off, and just use it without the nozzle end.
Right.
And I was just trying to think of rain barrels as well, because when it's not a horrible drought like we've been having, I never touch the hose. There are some summers where I never have to get out the hose, where I do all my watering just with watering can dipped in my rain barrel, and maybe a couple times dipping into the pond water. I can't recall, Andrew, do you have a water garden?
Yeah, I have a pond and I
Hmm.
use I often go there to dip the water can in there and get not again like you not even filling it. I don't have a rain barrel, but I think rain barrels are great way to harvest, water coming off of your house. We have actually the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society that's run through the Philadelphia Water Department, but we administer it called Rain Check. If you're a resident of Philadelphia, you can get a number of different kind of interventions to help deal with stormwater and rain barrel. You can also get a little rain garden, and that you can also get financial support with pervious paving. So there may be other similar programs in other municipalities.
Yeah, DC Department of Environment has a similar one where you can sign up and apply for rain barrel assistance in the past, or a rebate program, or getting a garden installed, as you said. Same thing in Montgomery County, Maryland. You can get rebates or get reimbursed if you submit like your rain garden plan or your rain barrel purchases. And I always say I just have a 1 English barrel rain garden that I got from Gardener's Workshop a long time ago. I love it because it has kind of a ribbed outside, so it can withstand freezing temperatures and that freeze thaw cycle. Because I find a lot of failures in rain barrels come along that if it just has that one long seam, that's where it will burst at, over the winter time if people don't drain their rain barrels and turn them over.
Right. Yep.
And I just love my rain barrel. It's because I feel like rainwater, and same thing with our water gardens that we're dipping into occasionally. I don't want to take too much of that water out of the water garden, but I feel like that water that's maybe has some fish fertilizer, we'll call it, in there, some fish poop, is fabulous for the containers that are near the water garden.
Yeah, my pond has, fish excrement, I'm sure, and a lot of leaves and stuff fall in the pond, and I'm really good at skimming them out. So in theory, there's some kind of diluted organic water that I fish out of there as well.
Yeah, and I don't know why, but I think every animal, cat, dog, wildlife, they go straight for the pond water over the rain barrel water every single time. I think there's something magical about it. So there's that. So let's talk about some other methods for keeping moisture in your soil. And one of them, you had written an article for PHS Online, and you talk about a layer of mulch and how leaving the leaves can help.
Yeah, so I put down, luckily through our municipality where I live, we can purchase composted leaves. It's more than leaves. There's other things that get mixed in, like uh, weeds and things like that. But it's all processed by the municipality, and they have this big machine that turns it up, and it gets really hot so that it kills. I would say 99%, if not more, of the weed seeds. And so you get it in the early spring, like in March, and it's essentially decomposed leaves that have also been kind of chopped up, so it actually has a really nice texture. And I put that around almost all of my plantings every year, so it helps, at least for part of the year, as a layer of mulch to help retain moisture in the soil. And then it ultimately is breaking down and adding organic matter to the soil. And if you have organic matter in the soil, that's good for water retention as well. Other types of mulches that people down, the one that's perhaps even more natural would be taking your leaves, chopping them up maybe with a mower, and then raking them back into the beds. And then there's a whole movement called, as you mentioned, leave the leaves. So unless you have really big leaves, like say sycamore leaves, maybe some of the larger oak leaves, just allowing to fall and kind of naturally decompose, that does a number of things. One, you're not using any fossil fuels to cut them up. Allowing them to fall and naturally decompose in the bed is great. Overwintering material for all sorts of overwintering or hibernating native insects, whether they be, butterflies, moths, or bees, or any of a number of other native insects. So, a lot of our native bees, for example, are, ground dwellers. Live, they don't live in a traditional beehive. They live, burrowing in the soil. So just allowing those leaves to kind of protect them for the winter is great. For some people, it's not the aesthetic that they want. It's more natural for sure, natural looking. And then kind of on the flip side, there are a number of other types of mulches. Like one that I see a lot in my area is triple shredded bark mulch. So the bark is being stripped off trees, usually for the either the paper industry or the lumber industry, and then that's further shred up and chopped up, and then put in huge piles. Also, kind of composting, and so that can be used. I think that does create more of a sterile environment. So it's not really very good habitat for overwintering insects. It does help retain the moisture. The organic ultimately it does break down into organic matter, although it's kind of on the slow side, and it's theorized that it can actually rob nitrogen from the soil. And then what I often like for trees is access to, say, wood chips. Maybe you've had some tree work done, and kind of these rough wood chips. And put those in a pile and just leave them for 9 months to a year, and let them kind of compost down, or just not become so they're not so raw and new. And those often are good mulch around trees or shrubs. It does two things. It helps hold in the moisture, but it also often keeps the weed whips at bay. It's a circle around the base of your tree, and if somebody is weed whipping, they're usually weed whipping up to the edge of the mulch, not the trunk of the tree where real damage can happen.
Yeah, and I was thinking also about some supplemental things we can do to hold moisture in the soil. So there's a product called Soil Moist. Have you ever used that, Andrew?
Is that like a hydrogel, or what?
Yeah, so it's just like soil moistener pellets, a polymer that you would put in at the root zone of the plant, and it just holds moisture in and then slowly releases it back in. I think it's the same substance used to absorb in diapers and those sorts of products. Of course, it is a plastic. I've used it, but only in container plantings.
Same here. When I used to have my landscaping business, we did a lot of containers in the city, and so we used one product called Super Sorb.
Mm.
It's pellets. Add water, they would swell up in kind of little chunks of jello, and then add in soil. And the idea is, just as you said, it holds moisture and then slowly releases it. And what it did for us in the city is we would water on Friday, we could, but then we didn't water over the weekends, so it would buy us maybe a day of watering. And then I know people have used it who maybe have a house, like say they go to the shore or to the mountains, and they're gone like Thursday night until Monday sometimes, so they really, don't have any way to keep their pots moist, so they might use that super soar product for that.
Mhm. That's exactly my observation too, Andrew, that it buys you a couple more days, like a weekend away, in the height of summer, so it can be helpful in that way. And there are some soil mixes I've seen, potting mixes on the market that have the soil moistener type pellets already mixed in. I wouldn't add more, like if you have it already in there, because a little does go a long way.
I heard a story one time where a landscaper was doing window boxes, and instead of pre-moistening it, they just mixed it in dry.
Mm.
They planted all their window. They came back, and all the plants and half of the soil were on the sidewalk because it expanded so much. It pushed out half of the soil and all of the plants, almost like a volcano. I advocate for pre-moistening and then adding to the soil, unless it's done in a scientific, blended way like these potting soils you've mentioned.
Hmm. Yeah, and you definitely want to obey those package instructions, because when they say like a quarter teaspoon at the root level, they really mean a quarter teaspoon. Because yeah, you don't need to come back to plants pushed out of the ground or a bunch of like clear jello, slime on the surface is what it's going to look like. So let's wrap up our conversation about watering and by talking about some of those favorite drought-tolerant plants, especially for the mid-Atlantic area.
Yeah, so in the Mid-Atlantic, we're fortunate in that we can grow so many different plants. We can grow temper plants, grow plants for more southern plants. We can also grow, some arid plants that
Mm.
typical in the Southwest or in the West. And so some of my favorites, like, if you're going to grow plants that can take these more droughty conditions. You're not just limited to desert type plants. However, for those who are interested, there are a number of hardy cactus that will take the humidity in particular and so of the mid Atlantic. So those would be genera like Opuntia, Cilindro, Opuntia, and some others. So you could go that route. The yuccas, the common name is Adam's needle. They have real kind of spiky foliage and look kind of desert-like. They have a very deep taproot and do quite well in droughty conditions. You often see them growing at the shore, in sandy soils. But then I would say almost anything that kind of comes from the native prairies of the United States. So a lot of ornamental grasses like the native switchgrass, panicum, little blue stem, schizocarium, big blue stem, andropogon, prairie dropseed, Sporobolus. All those grasses have pretty deep root systems and are pretty tolerant of dry conditions. And then there's a whole host of flowering plants, including indigo or baptisia, many, many dozens, if not hundreds, of cultivars of those, the cone flowers, the giant Rudbeckia maxima, I grow in my gravel garden. Another prairie plant that I like a lot that you don't see a lot of necessarily is the wild quinine, Parthenium integrifolia. Great white flowers, incredible pollinator plant, deer resistant. Um, and then, of course, the Amsonias. I would say most of the Amsonias. The one I grow the most of that really has deep roots is the threadleaf blue star Amsonia hubrichtii. Also,
Hmm.
Amsonias are deer resistant. Cone flowers, again, hundreds of cultivars. The ironweeds, a lot of ironweeds grow in wet, conditions, nearly standing water, real kind of marshy areas. But most of them are urban tough, drought tolerant. I grow some of the big ones, but I also grow one of the shorter ones, Vernonia lettermanii, iron butterfly, which is great, and of course the Asclepias. Most of the native Asclepias can take pretty dry conditions, especially the butterfly milkweed, Asclepias tuberosa. The swamp milkweed really needs wet, Asclepias incarnata, but they're a native species of Asclepias, so they're good for pollinators, also pretty deer resistant as well. So yeah, that's a handful there, but I would say most of your kind of meadow-esque, and prairie type plants, that's a good collection of plants to go to for great ornamental attributes, great ecological capacities, and then pretty drought tolerant as well.
Yeah, I was going to say definitely the Amsonia hubrecti, looking great this year through drought. Solidago, the goldenrods don't seem to be missing a beat, even though, some of them I would like to, die back a little and stunt them. They can be a little aggressive. And I was going to say everything in the Mediterranean herb category, like those silver-leafed herbs, from lavenders to anything with the woody ornamental herb category, thymes and oreganos, and the elfin thymes, even the spreading ones.
Yeah, it's sage, the
Mm-hmm.
super drought tolerant. I have lavender, several in my, I think, phenomenal in my gravel garden. I mean, they're not native, but the number of pollinators they attract is pretty impressive. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
leaves or fragrant foliage um, tend to be one drought resistant, and then they're also all deer resistant as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so doing great double duty and benefits there, and as you said, are usually good pollinator plants as well when they're in bloom. So how can our listeners contact you to find out more, Andrew?
So, good place to go for more information is phsonline.org. You'll see a tab for gardeners, and there's lots of information there. Blogs, our gold medal plant program is listed there. Of course, we'd love for people to consider becoming a member also, and then you get access to, members only programs, but you also get access to our magazine, our quarterly magazine, Grow magazine, where we have, it's very mid-Atlantic focus, so good kind of regional information on plants and gardens to visit, and the work that we do at PHS is captured in there as well. So those are two good sources. And of course, the flower show, is our biggest event, but it's also our biggest educational event. And last year we started a free lecture series. So once you had a ticket to the flower show, three free lectures every day. You gave a lecture for that.
Mm-hmm.
That again, and then we've actually done a spin-off on that. So that was called Know to Grow. And now we're doing a Know to Grow lecture series throughout the season. So we're going to kick off the first one uh, in August. They're webinars. So free, if you become a member, you essentially will get 10 free webinar lectures a year. And then members can pay, I think, $20. So we're going to kick off that August. We have Benjamin Vogt from Nebraska talking about prairie style ecological gardening. And then I think we have Bree Arthur about foodscaping. And then Marianne Wilburn will be talking about tropicals in the garden. Those are the first three. I'm finishing up the docket for the other seven, but those are three that we're talking about now.
Great. So we'll put a link to that in our show notes for the PHS Online and to the article you wrote about watering in the garden. And thank you so much, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kathy.
Alstroemeria aurea plant profile. Peruvian lily, Alstroemeria aurea, is a perennial flower that is native to South America. It is most familiar as a long-lasting cut flower, often used in supermarket bouquets, but it can be grown in the garden. It typically blooms in summer in shades of yellow or orange, often with a pattern of spots and streaks on the petals. Hybrid Alstroemeria, bred for the cut flower industry, come in a wider range of colors. It is hardy from USDA Zone 7 to 10. In Zone 7, it should be given winter protection and good drainage. It can also be treated similarly to other marginally hardy bulbs here, and you can dig the tubers in the fall to store them indoors for the winter, replanting them in the spring. Peruvian lily prefers to be grown in full to part sun. It typically grows from 12 to 18 inches high. Plant the tubers about 6 inches deep and water them regularly. They are drought tolerant once established. Alstroemeria is attractive to a variety of pollinators, and deer generally leave it alone, though rabbits have been known to chew on the foliage. Alstroemeria, you can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, we finally got some decent rain, so I'm enjoying seeing the pollinators visit the monarda and the sunflowers. Over at our community garden plot, I'm harvesting basil and onions and some early tomatoes, so that means it's time to make salsa. And speaking of tomatoes, our garden tip of the days for the past week or so have all centered on tomato issues, from why your tomato leaves are curling to what causes cracking or cat facing and other issues with the tomato fruits. So be sure you're following us at WDC Gardener on Twitter or on the Washington Gardener Magazine Facebook page, or that you have joined our Washington Gardener Google group so you can get those garden tips of the day. So we've had some great news this past week. GardenDC won the first ever Best Podcast HORTI Award, and that's HORTI HORTI Award, held by Gardencom. Thanks to all who voted for GardenDC, and congratulations to all the other HORTI Award winners. It's such a privilege to be able to do this podcast, and I want to thank all of our past guests, listeners, and supporters once again for making this podcast possible. In local gardening events, if you're in the greater Washington, D.C. area, you might want to check out the McKee-Beshers Wildlife Management Area in mid-July when the sunflower fields are at their peak, and that's near Poolesville, Maryland, not far from the Potomac River. It's free and open to all, but you might want to be prepared with long pants and lots of coverage on your skin because there can be mosquitoes and ticks. It is, again, a wildlife management area, not your typical park. But the sunflowers are amazing to see, and you can get some great photos there. Another upcoming local event that you might be interested in attending is the Woody Plant Conference on Friday, July 19th. And that is held at the Scott Arboretum of Swarthmore College. And you can register for that and find out more at woodyplantconference.org or through Longwood Gardens website. And finally, our annual Garlic Festival has shifted dates. It's no longer Sunday, July 14th. We have moved it to July 21st, and that's at the Takoma Park Farmers Market in partnership with the Farmers Market, the Takoma Horticultural Club, and friend of the show, Tony Sarmiento. And we are going to also have Chef Peter Andros there giving garlic-based tastes and recipes. This event is free and open to all. Come by and check it out, and all things garlic. Happy gardening!
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Groundcover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of their lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf, and which plants are the best ones for the job. Groundcover Revolution is here with all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Groundcover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Groundcover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and bookshop.org. In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Terry Spate, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the ingenious ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
This is Christy Page from GreenPrints with the last word on Garden Yoga, a story by Kay Flowers. I just love this story that was in the July issue of GreenPrints. There are countless websites and videos showcasing yoga for gardeners, each with a unique approach. However, if you're seeking a laid-back routine that doesn't demand perfection, you're in the right place. Here I present some delightful moves you can practice mostly from the comfort of your garden chair, savoring your morning coffee. Remember, slow and purposeful movements are the key, especially when sipping hot beverages. Tall mountain. Start by sitting up straight, engaging your core muscles and elongating your spine. Inhale deeply, exhale slowly, and relish the sense of your garden. Take a moment to appreciate the surroundings without focusing on the weeds. To relieve tension in your neck and shoulders, gently turn your head from side to side. If you catch your neighbor's gaze, offer a friendly salute with your coffee mug. Overhead lateral stretch. Maintain good posture as you hold your coffee mug in one hand and extend the opposite arm overhead. Lean gently to the side, stretching as far as comfortable. Switch sides and repeat the stretch. This move helps alleviate stiffness and promotes flexibility. Backward hand stretch. After finishing your coffee, stretch both arms straight in front of you, palms facing down. With one hand, gently bend the fingers of the opposite hand backward to stretch the wrist and shoulder muscles. Alternate hands to relieve tension accumulated from gardening tasks. Warrior pose. Position your chair near a patch of weeds. Sitting sideways, lower yourself over the area with one knee bent at a 90-degree angle and the other leg stretched behind. Use one hand for support as you pull weeds with the other. This pose lengthens the legs and eases hip discomfort. Child pose. Transition into a relaxing stretch by sitting tall, then slowly folding forward with arms extended alongside your legs. Allow your torso to rest on your thighs while letting your arms hang freely. Embrace the relaxation, disregarding any teasing from family members. Afterward, gently pull one knee toward your chest, alternating sides to release tension along the spine and legs. Savasana. Find a dry spot on the grass, lie on your back, and spread your limbs like a snow angel. Close your eyes and embrace gratitude for the natural world around you. When you're ready, slowly return to a seated position, being mindful of potential dizziness. Remember, starting garden yoga may cause discomfort in unfamiliar areas, so give your muscles time to recover. Consider using some gel to soothe any aches. This has been the last word from Christy Page with GreenPrints.com.
Thank you for listening to GardenDC. You can become a listener supporter for as little as 99 cents a month by going to the supporter link in our show notes or directly to podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/GardenDC/support. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on social media at WDC Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, and Pinterest, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Please take a minute to share us on social media with #GardenDC so other gardeners can find us too.